Most people think the number one thing keeping them broke is a lack of intelligence. I do not believe that. I think it is ignorance. Not ignorance in the insulting sense. Ignorance in the practical sense. They have never been taught what money is actually for, how savings really work, why expectations quietly ruin people, and why behavior matters far more than secret formulas. That misunderstanding is expensive. It keeps people chasing the wrong target for decades. They think getting good with money is about being brilliant. They think there must be a private club, some hidden Wall Street language, some elite background, some special degree, some sophisticated equation that ordinary people never had access to. That is fantasy. Money is not like surgery. It is not like engineering. It is not like physics. In those fields, extraordinary performance requires extraordinary technical skill. With money, I have seen something very different. An ordinary person with average intelligence and excellent behavior can become wealthy. An extraordinary person with elite education and terrible behavior can go broke. That happens all the time. And the reason it happens is simple. Money is far more psychological than people want to admit. It is about what you do when nobody is watching. It is about whether you can delay ego. It is about whether you can stop comparing. It is about whether you can save something before you spend everything. It is about whether you use money as a tool to build a life or a yardstick to measure yourself against people who are not even thinking about you. That last point matters more than a great deal of financial misery is not caused by low income alone. It is caused by expectations that rose faster than income ever could. That is one of the hardest truths in personal finance. People do not only spend because they need, they spend because they imagine a certain version of themselves and then try to purchase it. A nicer apartment, a better car, a more expensive dinner, clothes that signal something, vacations that look successful, objects that say to the world, I am doing better than I feel. That is a very common game. It is also a very expensive one. I think one of the most useful definitions in life is this. Happiness is the gap between expectations and reality. If reality is decent but expectations are wild, you will still feel poor, still feel late, still feel behind, still feel inadequate. And because money is so measurable, it becomes the easiest thing in the world to chase. When your identity is unsettled, it is easy to say, I need more money. It is much harder to say, I need better expectations, more patience, more discipline, less envy, more gratitude, and a clearer definition of what a good life actually is. The strange thing is that most people know this in other parts of life. Ask a parent what they want for their child. Most will not say, I want my child to own a bigger house than the neighbor. They will say, I want them to be happy, I want them to be safe, I want them to have a good marriage, good health, a stable life, meaningful work, real friendships. People understand intuitively that richness and happiness are not identical. Then they treat their own financial life as though the only missing ingredient is a larger number. That contradiction is where a lot of suffering begins. I have always believed that if you do not define what enough looks like, then more becomes a treadmill with no end. And treadmills are dangerous because they create the illusion of movement without ever delivering arrival. You get the raise and the target moves, you pay off one debt and invent a new lifestyle. You buy the house and now the better neighborhood calls you. You hit one savings number and now a larger number becomes the only thing that feels respectable. There is no peace on that road because the goalpost never stops moving. And once the goalpost keeps moving, risk begins rising. People do foolish things when they are desperate to catch a moving definition of enough. They use debt to purchase an image. They buy houses too early. They upgrade before they are ready. They compare themselves to people whose stress, sacrifices, and private misery they cannot see. Everybody is jealous of what another person has. Almost nobody is jealous of what it took to get there. That is one reason comparison is so destructive. You see the car. You do not see the anxiety. You see the house. You do not see the marriage strain. You see the success. You do not see the pressure, the years, the fear, the compromises, the sleepless nights, or the loss of freedom that came with it. And because you only see the visible side, your imagination fills in the rest with fantasy. That is why I try to ask a simpler question. If nobody were watching me, what kind of life would I want? That is a very clarifying question. If no one could see your house, what house would you want? If nobody knew your car, what car would you drive? If nobody could admire your watch, your clothes, your vacations, or your spending, how much of what you currently chase would still matter to you? A great deal of modern consumption disappears when no audience is available. That should tell you something. Status purchases are often disguised as personal desire. Once you remove the audience, utility becomes much easier to see. And utility is where contentment tends to live. That is one of the reasons I think the phrase financially successful gets misused. For most people, success is not a private jet. It is not a private island. It is not being able to perform wealth for strangers. For most people, success is much quieter. A stable home, no constant panic, a cushion for emergencies, the ability to retire with dignity, the ability to spend time with family, the ability to say no, the ability to sleep, the ability to avoid being cornered by life every time something goes wrong. That is success. That is also much more achievable than the culture. You do not need genius for that. You need behavior. This is why I always come back to saving. People underestimate saving because they think only in terms of future purchases. They say, why would I save $100 when I could spend $100 now? That sounds logical only if you misunderstand what savings buy. Savings do not merely buy future stuff. Savings buy independence. That is the real product. Every dollar you save is a small piece of your future that you now control instead of renting from somebody else. Every dollar of debt is a small piece of your future that somebody else owns. Once you understand that, savings stop looking like delayed gratification and start looking like immediate freedom. If I save $100 today, I did not merely postpone pleasure. I purchased $100 of breathing room, $100 of resilience, $100 of reduced fear, $100 of optionality, $100 of better sleep. That is not theoretical. It changes the way you feel immediately. This is one of the reasons. The better question is, how much of my life do I want to own? Because that is what savings answer. Not all at once. Gradually, quietly, powerfully. The person who has savings is not merely the person with a larger number in an account. It is the person who can survive a layoff with less panic. It is the person who can leave a bad job sooner. It is the person who can avoid a predatory loan. It is the person who can handle a medical bill, a broken transmission, a bad year, or a recession, without feeling like one bad month means disaster. That is why I do not think of savings as optional. I think of savings as an expense, just like rent or food. Not because it is legally required, because life is fragile. What are the odds that over the course of your life you face job loss, illness, recession, family crisis, divorce, market stress, or some event you never saw coming? Close to certain. And when that moment comes, the savings you built during ordinary days become more valuable than almost anything else you own. That is why I tell people to automate it if they can. The more you can remove emotion from financial behavior, the better your odds get. People are emotional, biased, tired, tempted, socially pressured, ashamed, impulsive. That is normal. Automation is useful because it helps you do the right thing, before the wrong mood has a chance to interfere. Treat savings like the bill that gets paid first. Then let life organize itself around what remains. This leads to another important point. Anything is better than nothing. I have never liked the thinking that says if I cannot save a large amount, then there is no point. That is one of the most destructive stories people tell themselves. If all you can save is $5, save $5. If all you can save is 10% of a small weekend job, save 10%. The amount matters less at the beginning than the identity. You are teaching yourself that part of what comes in belongs to your future, not entirely to the present. That lesson repeated becomes habit. Habit becomes structure. Structure becomes wealth. A lot of people who later looked disciplined did not begin disciplined. They began with tiny acts repeated long enough that those acts became part of who they were. And once saving becomes identity instead of event, everything gets easier. I think people also overestimate how much intelligence investing requires and underestimate how much patience it requires. This is another area where the culture loves glamour. People imagine brilliant traders, hedge funds, secret data, instant moves, private information, and technical complexity. I have no great interest in that as a life model for ordinary people. What matters much more is compounding. Compounding is not hard to understand. You invest $100, it earns a return. Now the return itself begins earning return. Then those returns begin earning returns. The gains start building on gains. That is all compounding is. Simple. The miracle is not the formula. The miracle is the duration. The reason Warren Buffett became Warren Buffett is not merely that he had good returns. It is that he had good returns for an extremely long period of time. The duration is what turns respectable results into absurd results. That is a very hopeful fact for ordinary people, because it means you do not need to be extraordinary. You can be average for an above-average period of time and end up with extraordinary outcomes. That sentence is more useful than most financial advice people pay for. Average for a long time can beat brilliant for a short time. Average with discipline can beat talented with ego. Average with consistency can beat sophisticated with bad habits. That is what so many people fail to understand. They think if they are not smarter than Wall Street, they cannot win. They are focusing on the wrong contest. Most people do not need to outsmart Wall Street. They need to outlast their own impatience. That is the real contest. If you can invest regularly, keep costs low, use broad index funds, and avoid constantly interrupting yourself, you are already doing something very powerful. I have always preferred boring investing, not because boring sounds impressive, because boring is stickable, and what is stickable has a much higher chance of actually compounding over decades. If your strategy is too complex to live with, it does not matter how smart it looks on a spreadsheet. A brilliant strategy you abandon is inferior to a plain strategy you stick with. That is true in almost every area of money. You must ask not only what is optimal, you must ask what is sustainable for my personality. Some people can tolerate huge market swings. Some cannot. Some people can hold mostly equities and sleep soundly. Some wake up at 2 a.m. in a panic. There is no investing return great enough to compensate for a financial life that destroys your peace. The goal is not to maximize spreadsheet glory. The goal is to use money as a tool to build a better life. That includes sleeping well. It includes not making yourself sick chasing performance. It includes a portfolio simple enough that you can keep going when markets become frightening. If a person says, "I am afraid to invest because I might lose money," I understand that fear. The answer is not recklessness. The answer is allocation aligned with temperament. Own enough risk that your future grows, but not so much that your nerves force you to sabotage yourself. The best portfolio is not the one with the highest theoretical return. It is the one you can live with for 30 years. That is the real standard. And once again, this comes back to independence. People think rich and wealthy mean the same thing. I do not. Rich often means high income and visible spending. Wealthy means assets you are not spending. Rich means a lifestyle. Wealth means freedom. Rich means you can make the payment this month. Wealth means you do not have to obey every payment for the rest of your life. That is a very different thing. I have known people with little money and great independence. I have known people with huge money and no independence at all, because they were psychologically owned by comparison, by status, by obligation, by the opinions of others, by the need to keep performing who they thought they had become. Money without independence is just a different kind of pressure. That is why my favorite financial goal has never been to look rich. It has been to own my time. That is the highest use of money I know. The ability to wake up and say, I can do what matters. I can protect my family. I can make choices without panic. I can walk away from some things. I can wait. I can breathe. That is wealth, and it does not require perfection to begin moving toward it. It requires honesty, a little courage, some behavioral cleanup, some willingness to save before spending, some patience, some refusal to let the internet tell you what kind of life you are supposed to want, some practice asking a harder question every time money enters your hands. Is this purchase really for my life? Or is it for my image? Is this debt buying utility? Or is it selling away my future? Is this money helping me own more of my life? Or is it? That is how people get good with money, not by becoming financial celebrities, by becoming behaviorally consistent. And once they do that, something important happens. The story in their head changes. They stop saying, I am bad with money. They stop saying it is too late. They stop saying, I need a secret. They stop saying everyone else got the map and I did not. And they begin saying something much more useful. I can learn, I can lower the target, I can define enough, I can become more patient, I can build independence a little at a time. That is a much better story. It is also usually a much truer one, because in money, as in most of life, the biggest improvements rarely come from discovering hidden formulas. They come from finally respecting the obvious: spend less than you make. Save some of the invest patiently. Ignore most of the comparison game. Use money as a tool. Keep your expectations from running wild. Understand that enough is not failure. Enough is where contentment begins. And once contentment begins, a great deal of foolish spending ends. That is when money starts helping instead of hurting. That is when your life starts becoming more yours. And that is the kind of return I have always trusted most.